What it is, what is up, welcome back to my channel. It's a wrap, aka Yudi here, and we're finally here. I'm talking about my favorite reads from 2025. If you are interested, stick around. So this was actually very easy for me because out of 56 books that I read last year, I only gave 4 a 5 and I gave 1 a 4.75. I mean, really easy. That's 5 right there. So we're going to keep this really brief. I have 5 almost 5-star reads. I actually felt like I had a pretty good reading year, but I also will give caveat that it takes a lot for me to give something a 5-star. Like if it's a 5-star, it's gonna be in my mind rent free. I'm never gonna forget the books. The characters live rent free in my mind. It's on my shelf. That's saying that the other books that I read this year, I had a lot of 4s. I think my average rating this year, my average rating, look at my story graph. My average rating in 2025 was a 4. So I feel like I had a really good reading year. It's just I rarely have 5s. Like I rarely rate, if out of 1 through 5, I rarely rate things a 5. Like if it's a 5, like this is near and dear to my heart. Just to give a little bit of stats before I give my top 5. So out of 56 books, my average rating was I said a 4, but it's really a 3.85. I read 18,797 pages. My goal, I think, was 20,000, but my goal was also 60 books. And I was just, like 4 books under 60. And next year, my goal is also still going to be 60. In terms of my top genres that I read in 2025, number 1 was literary, which is no surprise. Literary fiction is like my favorite genre. I was surprised that number 2 was romance because, well, actually, I think I did read a lot of romance. I don't think I enjoyed a lot of romance this year, but I did read a lot. So second was romance. I read 14 romances. I read 15 literary fiction. Contemporary, which for me, contemporary kind of can fall into the literary fiction category. I read 9, and then I read 8 thrillers, and then the other one I made my top was I read 7 young adult. The one thing I feel like was missing from here was I felt like I read a lot of historical fiction in 2025, and I don't feel like it's reflected in my top genres. I definitely read a lot, especially from the new releases. I read a lot of new releases that were historical fiction. Okay, moving on. My longest book that I read in 2025 was Soul Crush, which I read at the end of the year, which was 500 pages. And then the shortest book I read was Elite Capture, which was 150 pages. And that one was an essay on identity politics and how the elite class is, how they're using their power in terms of identity politics. It was an interesting read, very short. And then I'll tell you, the book that took me the longest to read was Seasons of Fidelity, was because I started it and then in the middle of it, I started reading other stuff, and then I finally came back to it and finished it. But I really did enjoy Seasons of Fidelity, which it took me, I think it took me all year, 258 days. Yeah. So I started at the beginning of the year, and then I dropped it and never took it off my currently reading list. I never paused it. And then I came back to it and read it at the end of the year. My top 5 reads for 2025. So I was debating if I should include this one because I mostly read it actually in 2024 through December, but it was the first book I finished when I started the new year in 2025. So I'm still going to include it anyway because I technically finished it in 2025, and that is Linden Hills by Gloria Naylor. And I had a really, really good time with this one. I think it was my first or second book haul, and I was showing this book, and Kayla's Bookish Vibe, she commented that it was a really good book to read during the Christmas time, and which is perfect because I get off during that time. So that's when I usually get a good chunk of my reading for the year in, because I get a really long, usually around 2 weeks off. So I ended up picking up that book, and I had such a good time with Linden Hills, and I loved it so much. I had Men of Brewster's Place, and I have never read Woman of Brewster's Place, so I went and I picked that book up. That neighborhood of Linden Hills, and Gloria's commentary on class and the bourgeoisie, and it was just a really good read. I had a really good time with this one. It will forever live rent free in my mind. And then the next book that I finished, also near the top of the year, was Jamaica Road by Lisa Smith. Daphne and Connie, and their love story, which I'm hesitant to say, but just like them coming of age together, their journey of falling in love with one another. It was a really riveting read for me, and the ending left me with so much thoughts, good or bad. We can talk about it, but there's just so much to say about what happens in this book, and there's so many topics that are covered. I would consider this a book club read. Again, the love story between Daphne and Connie, the whole family dynamic that's happening with Connie in terms of like immigration, trigger warning, domestic violence, the relationship that Daphne has with her father and her parents, and all them both going through that as they're growing up and growing together. It's a really good read. It's just, I had a really great time with this one, and again, will live rent free in my mind. Okay, and then this is actually political essays. This is June Jordan. It's a collection of her political essays that I read this year, and I think I have multiple things. One, it was very timely. She wrote these political essays throughout the 80s, or like the early half of the 80s. She just has, or had, a lot of, I think, political commentary that is unfortunately still very relevant, especially right now in the climate of the world that we live in. But all these things that show that they have been prevalent from the 80s. Even probably before then, but through all this time, it's been present and unresolved. And it reminds you that these issues that we're facing are unfortunately not new. And there is something powerful about reading from your past, or reading the past political thoughts of activists and so forth, and thought leaders, to one, be grounded in knowing that this is not like while things may change and shift, the root of the problem is to be grounded that we still have work to do to address the root. And I don't want to forget the past, because it tells our future in our current situation. So yes, all in all, to say that I really enjoy. If you haven't read any of June Jordan's essays, I had a really good time reading the essays, which is why I rated it a 5. And then moving on to the next one, I read Sugar by Bernice L. McFadden this year. Did I read this? I may have read this last year, which is why it's not on here. But I read Loving Donovan. That's the first book I've ever read by Bernice L. McFadden. And as a person who grew up in the library, and I always used to pass Bernice, especially as I got older as a teenager. I always used to pass Bernice L. McFadden's work in the library. And I don't know why I never thought to pick it up, or why I was never drawn to picking up the books when I was in the library. But also, I was younger. But now I'm older. I picked up Loving Donovan. I believe it was last year. I had a great time with that story. It was giving, like, I'm a psychologist, I'm a therapist. It was literally dissecting from the 2 points of view, these two people that come together, that start this relationship that ultimately ends in heartbreak. And as a reader, you see it coming because of all the things that we learn about these characters along the way. And it's crazy how you're seeing them get together, and you're all like, oh man, like, if they don't say this, or if this doesn't happen, this isn't going to work. And it's like, you kind of see it coming. But anyway, I read Sugar, which is, I think, Bitter Earth. It's part of the Bitter Earth series, and this is the first book in the series. And I just had a really great time with these characters and the friendship that was developed within this book and the exploration in womanhood. Overall, I mean, I'm coming into 2026. Actually, I think the first book that I finished, the second book I finished in 2026 is Bernice McFadden book, and I also had a good time with that one as well. There's a lot of catching up that I have to do with them or her as an author. So, but just know that this was one of my favorite reads, and I think it also followed a theme. Did I read The Street? I think I read The Street this year. Yeah, I did. I just didn't rate it. So we're throwing that next. Sugar, I really loved, but also The Street by Petry was 100%. Ludi, I keep talking, like in the past, maybe 4 or 5 videos, I keep talking about Ludi Johnson. Okay, Ludi Johnson lives rent free in my mind. I don't think she lives rent free in my mind. The fact that like that book was written in the 40s? Yeah, it was written in the 40s, and all of the struggles and frustrations that unfortunately she went through as a character still feels so relevant and such a human feeling that can still be connected to in the year of 2026 is crazy to me. Yeah, like absolutely understand why this book sold 1 million copies. And you know what's so crazy? I mean, the space that I occupy on YouTube and in the bookish social media space, I hear this book mentioned a lot in terms of like important canon that should be read. But outside of that, like outside of this bookish community, you don't really hear this book a lot in conversations about books you should read, and there are classics. And man, the way we should talk, we talk about it, but the way that I wish this book was just talked about more, which is going to come up in another, because there's another classic that I read that I'm just all like, oh my gosh. Again, of course, it's the bookish community that I occupy that pushed me to add this to a list of books that I had, that I know I wanted to read. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I wish that just collectively we talked about this work more, and that, you know, it should be required reading. Granted, I don't know if when I was like 15 or 16 that I would have sat with these books the same way that I do now, that I've, been through some life. And there's just some aspects of what the characters are going through that I really resonate with as I hit, these specific crossroads at, the age that I'm at. But how empowering it would be if we read these books and knew about these books, especially as Black women when we were younger, and the way with that knowledge and that knowing, and that knowing, and like we're probably going through these feelings, but not having the vocabulary or the canon to really ground our experiences in a collective thought. Like, it would be so empowering if we just, read the pack of books. I'm gonna make a video on it. But if we read just the specific books that I've been reading, I think if we all read these books, we change the world. But anyway, yes, The Street. I love The Street. I mean, all these books are like, they have changed my life and my thought forever. But yeah, moving to the next book. So I guess it's going to be more than 5. It's going to be, I'm sorry, y'all, it's going to be 6. The next book I have, which is also the last book, is Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson. I finally read Allegedly. This is the one that didn't quite make it to a 5. It was a 4.75. But I'm not going to talk too much about this book, which is so interesting. If you go on Storygraph, I don't know if it's the same with Goodreads. I use Storygraph, but the description relates this book to Monster by Walter Dean Myers. I remember I read that book when I was young, and that's another book that kind of sticks with me. And Allegedly definitely had that same gave me those same feelings. And baby, that ending, I mean, but Tiffany D. Jackson's good for like a flipping a switch. And you're like, hold up, I have to rethink everything I just read. Okay. But yeah, I absolutely, I love this book. Yeah. Another book that I really enjoyed. At this point, I've read a couple Tiffany D. Jackson books, but I will say I think Monday's Not Coming is still my favorite. Also because Monday's Not Coming felt so, especially as a young person coming up in that area, like when they took the trip to Pentagon City, like all of that feels very like it felt very familiar, but also still a very tragic story, which they all kind of are. Allegedly is up there too. I think my top two, if I do a top two, it's Allegedly and Monday's Not Coming. So yeah, those are my top reads for 2025. Let me know your top reads for 2025, or if you've read these books and you're like my forever, I love these books, or some of the new releases, because I was debating, I was like, should I just concentrate on the new releases that came out in 2025 that I enjoyed? And I might do another video just talking about the 2025 releases and my favorite of the ones that I've read that I really enjoyed. But yeah, in terms of just all the books that I read for 2025, these were my favorites. Like, I ain't never gonna forget them. Okay, I'm gonna recommend them for the rest of my life. Until the next time, y'all, let's continue our conversation in the comments. Deuces.